Ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. The Balance Breakdown is live. I am joined by the one and only Spencer Kite to talk everything UFC 304. As has sort of become a very small person, Mr. Ian O'Neill is not with us this week. He is doing very important life things and will be back in the near future, probably 2 weeks or something like that. As I said, I am here with Spencer. We are going to break down every fight from top to bottom of the UFC 304 card. Before we start, Mr. Kite, how are you, sir? How was your weekend? How are things?
I'm well. The weekend was busy. We had family in town. Friday night got a little loud and messy here at the Kite household. Saturday then involved getting up and going to a memorial, so that was a little awkward for everybody that was feeling a little under the weather. Came home, watched the fights, then stayed up to write about the fights, then got up Sunday morning to walk the dog and write more about the fights. And so the in-laws are gone. The messiness has subsided, and I'm looking forward to a very quiet, relaxing week of early bedtimes and not much action whatsoever. How are you?
I'm grand now. Grand. We didn't watch the fights live because they were on at a ludicrous time. We're gonna certainly get to that. But I watched them Sunday evening, and for the most part, outside of it being 14 fights, it was a pretty good night altogether. In terms of names and these sorts of things, I think what I'll start with, right, is that the fallout from the card itself. So going in, we had some questions around how fighters would react. Obviously, the UK fighters, there was a UK fighter in almost every single bout across UK or Irish, sorry, across every single bout on this card. And really, it was a showcase of everything that the UK has to offer right now. Rocky Edwards, massive fight at the top of the bill. Tom Aspinall, huge fight. Paddy Pimblett, massive fan favorite. Christian Leroy Duncan, rising prospect. The list goes on and on and on. And we'll sort of get there. But there was conversation and a lot of sort of disparaging opinions and thoughts about the fact that this card was starting at 11 p.m. and would finish at 6 a.m. Now, it's not like the UFC haven't had precedent for this previously. When Michael Bisping fought Dan Henderson for the second time in Manchester, exactly the same thing happened. However, recently for fight nights and the numbered card in London, these have been put on at sort of a regular time in the UK hemisphere. So I completely understand fans' distaste at this. I also understand that on the night, according to Topology, there was 17,907 people in attendance. So clearly enough people. And, I think I'll throw it over to you immediately in 1 second. I just think that it's worth stating that the way in which the UFC will change its actions is through its pocket, right? As of right now, the numbers on Topology, sorry, Sean, the ticket revenue at the live gate is $6.7 million, right? If that number said $500,000, right, the UFC would say, what the fuck happened, lads? What are we doing? We went to the UK. We went to, it's not Leon Edwards' hometown, but it's not so far from Leon Edwards' hometown. It is very close to Tom Aspinall's hometown, and we couldn't sell the place out, right? That's just not the case here, right? In every single time the UFC comes to the UK and Irish shores, irrespective, it could be me and you fighting in the headline. And before it's announced, let's not do that. Before it's announced, I've seen your bag workout, before it's announced, we're looking at a sellout, irrespective, right? We're looking at a sellout. And so whilst I think that the criticisms were or are valid in some ways, we also must, sort of add action to that. And there obviously wasn't. Any thoughts specifically on the outlay based on the time?
Well, first and foremost, I've seen your ground game, so it would be an interesting striker versus grappler battle that we would have where neither of us want to hurt the other because you're a dear friend and I could never do that to you. Selfishly, I wanted this card, right? This is a UK card. For me, that means we get started somewhere around 10 o'clock in the morning here on the west coast of Canada. I have a cup of coffee, some eggs, and I watch some face punching. It's grand. Pay-per-views generally are the longest, latest nights that I have of my work life, and they stretch on because I always write after them. And so to do a UK card at this time, traditional North American pay-per-view time, means I was up later than I wanted to be on Saturday, covering a UK card. Now, as you said, this is all about finances. This is all about getting the most eyeballs possible on these events. And so if you had this running in that sort of afternoon time slot in the United States, Canada, here in North America, you're probably not getting as many people. That's just the way it goes. There's not going to be as many people tuning in live, sitting down, going to bars, going to restaurants, getting together with their friends, because it's Saturday afternoon in the middle of the summer and your kids have stuff and the wife wants to go away and the partner wants to do XYZ and you have responsibilities. And so they make that calculation of, we're going to draw the most eyes. You and I have had many a conversation about sometimes you have to redo that calculus. Sometimes you have to not look at what gets us the most dollars and look at what makes the most sense. To me and you, doing this at a time that was more convenient and favorable to the local audience, where it's only a handful of times a year that the North American audience is asked to change things up. Whereas everywhere else around the world, they have to adjust to the standard start times. And so it would have made a great deal of sense to me to roll into Manchester, to have the show start at 3:00 in the afternoon. That means it's, 7:00 here. I think that's good math. 8 hours. Yep. Lovely. Means I'm done early. It's a nice day. However, as you said, 17,000 plus people at Co-op Live, a gate of north of $6 million. Regardless of the fact that folks looked like they were starting to get sleepy and starting to get tired, and we had reports from boots on the ground that, you get the odd picture of somebody falling asleep on the chair and leaning down and struggling a little bit. Seemed pretty boisterous when Tom Aspinall got his victory and seemed deathly quiet when Belal Muhammad got his. But I personally, if I'm in that room and it's my decision, I'm going at a afternoon start time in Manchester to maximize Manchester and asking the North American audience, hey, do once what this market, this population does quite frequently.
Yeah, and we won't spend too much more time on that specific point, but I think that's really valid because the audience in the UK, the market in the UK is so strong for the UFC. I think when I was there live for Bisping Henderson 2, and I had a very similar experience to what I'm sure a lot of people in the Co-op Live had, where there certainly was a lot of pop at 11 p.m. People, what they did, it was in Manchester, in I can't remember actually what the stadium was. It might have been the MEN Arena, but in Manchester, people had gone out for their night out, right? Started at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., got super drunk, had a great time, rolled into the fights at 11 p.m. And the first 3 or 4 fights were absolutely popping. The crowd was on fire for all of those fighters. And then everyone died a death. And by the time Mike Perry absolutely decimated Danny Roberts, fucking nobody said anything. Nothing happened. And then everyone woke up for Michael Bisping. And obviously that fight was what it was. It was electric, blah, 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 blah. But there is an element with which I think Dana's distasteful comments, just generally about the card, about the fighters, about the performances, a lot of that can be put down to the time in which that's occurring. So we're going to use that as a segue to roll on to the main event. Belal Muhammad, 5 rounds, decision win against Leon Edwards. Firstly, let's start here, right? Because there's going to be, as always, when a champion loses, there's always the what happened to the champion thing, right? Let's start with Belal Muhammad has been waiting for so long for just an opportunity at gold. It doesn't matter to Belal Muhammad who it was. It just happened to be Leon Edwards this time around. He goes out there and, irrespective of who was stood in front of him, looked absolutely fantastic for 3.5 rounds. 1 round where he gets his back taken. These things happen in MMA. But really, not a lot happened. There wasn't any deep submission attempts. There was a little bit of damage, but a lot of control time. Fine. Other than that, he manages to put the champion on his back and almost exclusively takes the champion's back and controls him there for significant periods of that fight. The only damage he takes is in the final 45 seconds of that 25 minutes. Really, the only damage. I think we have to put our hands up and say that Belal Muhammad, irrespective of what happened on the night to Leon Edwards, irrespective, this is a game where it's whoever turns up on the day, whoever can implement the game plan on the day, whoever can be at their athletic best on the day. And Belal Muhammad was pretty fantastic. Thoughts?
So I would argue that, well, yes, he would have fought anybody for the title. The fact that it was Leon Edwards made it all that more sweeter. And it was 1,233 days. That's what he waited. From the time he got poked in the eye till Saturday, he waited every one of those 1,200 plus days to get in there and prove to everybody what he's been saying all along. I'm better than this guy. And as you said, for 3.5 rounds, he was better than that guy. The thing that impressed me the most, and I was kind of texting along with Sean Madden as we were watching this, because he and I had done the coach conversation on this fight and talked about a bunch of the different nuances and elements that it might be. And when Leon Edwards comes out and wins the 3rd round to get it to 2-1, where it feels like, okay, sent him a message and said, the fight hangs here. This is the round that decides the fight. Because if Belal goes up 3-1, I don't think Leon is pulling a Hail Mary again. I don't think it's there. He didn't look like he had it. Now, granted, he didn't look like he had it in Salt Lake City either, and he found it. And then Belal wins that round and wins it handily again and just takes him down and controls him, and he doesn't get back up and he can't do anything. And that was the fight. You talked about this sport being who turns up on the night. My post-fight column for Sportsnet hinged on that. That was the lead. Urgency and sort of understanding that I need to be dialed in. I need to be locked in from second one, as you would say, when I get in there, is a thing I think we need to focus on more as we do analysis of these fights, because there are some people that certainly have it. Belal Muhammad, chief among them. There's never a moment where he comes out and you go, it's a slow start, and Belal looks it's gas. It's dialed in. It's put pressure on you. I'm going to enforce my will from the get-go. I think we saw it in the Tom Aspinall fight as well. A little bit of that urgency and understanding of moments that Curtis Blaydes just doesn't have. Leon did not have that at all. We can hypothesize, easy for me to say, and theorize about all the reasons why. I certainly would argue that the fact that it was 5:30 in the morning when the fight began probably played a factor in that. It's a very weird time. Your body just, if you haven't spent, I would argue probably the last 10 days preparing your body to be as awake and focused and active and ready to go and activated as it needs to be for that situation leading up to it, then it's going to be difficult to dial it up on that night. But you have to all this has to start with Belal Muhammad did exactly what he said he was going to do, and you have to tip your cap to him. He is, without question, the UFC welterweight champion, undisputed. Congratulations, Belal Muhammad.
100%. And I think the only critique I will give, and I will only give this because we're talking about a championship fight, right? We are talking about the most important fight in both of these fighters' careers, is these fighters knew ahead of time that this fight was going to be at this time, right? It wasn't as though they had spent their entire camp and then the UFC said, actually, lads, a week out, what we're going to do, hear me out, just hear me out, lads. We're going to change this and we're going to do it at 5:30 in the morning, right? Then I would completely understand, right? What a fucking curveball, etc., etc. Leon Edwards is the welterweight champion. That means in his gym, in his training camp, there's a level of precedent that is set towards him and towards his training, towards his camp. I would be shocked if I found out that members of his team were not willing to train with him around that time, right? And so if we're unable to acclimatize our bodies, if we're unable to get ready for what is the biggest fight of our career, irrespective of who's in front of us, we are defending a UFC welterweight world title. That is massive, both financially and from a legacy perspective. What are we doing? What are we doing? Now, I know that that's a harsh take, but I think that that is a take that if we were looking at an Olympic team, or if we were looking at an outfit of people that were, you know, an NBA team, an NHL team, whatever it is, if they were going to go and play in Tokyo, or they were going to go and play in South America, or they were going to play in Australia or New Zealand or whatever, and there was a time difference or an altitude difference or whatever, they prepped for that, right? That is something that is absolutely prepped for. And so,
and that's why I would say it's not a harsh take at all, right? We talk about this every time anyone goes anywhere else for a fight. So when they came to Denver a couple of weeks ago, we talked about how so many people came out early because they had to get acclimated. When they go to the West Coast and they're from Europe, especially, it's we come out early because we need to get our body adjusted. We need to get right. We need to get on the schedule. People, when they come to Vegas for the summer, it's so damn hot. We've got to go and figure it out and get our body used to it. I've experienced it where you go out there and you think, oh, I can just go about my normal things that I usually do. And it's so hot and so gross and so different than everything you're used to that your body just says, nah, we ain't fucking doing this. And you're laid up in bed for a day dealing with your body just getting every bad thing out of you. And so I don't think it's a hot take at all. Like I said, the 10-day thing, to me, that's the bare minimum. And I understand I've done it myself for covering events that start at, 1 o'clock in the morning because we're doing Road to UFC. It's difficult to force yourself to go to bed at a time that is antithetical to what your body wants and needs and feels. And it's weird spending your day existing when everything else is off. I get it. There's a UFC championship belt hanging in the balance. If this wasn't a 2-month plan, what are we doing, lads? What are we doing? It's your gym. Like, not yours in the sense that you own it, but you're the big dog. I have heard throughout the build to this how much respect, how much ownership he commands in that room. If you can't get everybody on board with, okay, here's what we're doing. We're going at 3 a.m. and we're doing our hard rounds at 5 a.m. so that our body gets used to it. And for the next 2 months, listen, sorry, everybody else, this is how we're doing it. What are we doing? And look, it certainly favors a guy like Belal Muhammad that lives and trains in Chicago. So is in the central time zone, which means he's, 6 hours time difference. So when they step in the octagon, it's midnight for him if he can keep his body on standard schedule to where he is. That's certainly a benefit. Generally fight around midnight lots of times, especially as a main event guy. If you weren't doing everything in your power to adjust to that and address that, as you said, this wasn't sprung on you last minute. This had to be factored in. If you were, they went over to Salt Lake City early. How are you not prepping for this early?
Indeed. I just want to cover off some of the nuances, or specifically the fact that Belal put such an impressive set of elements together in order to force the performance that he did out of Leon. So I think arguably Leon did look tired. He looked slow. He looked a shadow of his usual sharp, crisp decision-making self. It felt as though in some of the moments where Belal would either fake up top or actually land a shot up top to then shoot, Leon was not registering what was happening quick enough. And that is very alien to what we are usually seeing for somebody like Leon Edwards. However, what I was impressed with Belal was immediately he would cut the cage off immediately, whether it was forward pressure, striking straight through Leon's center line with his footwork, or whether it was side to side, just cutting off the pizza angle, as Dan Hardy would call it. When Leon got behind the tram line, then Belal picked his moments really beautifully by switching stances, showing him shots to the body, showing him shots up top, and then immediately level changing. Now, obviously, we saw the fantastic high crotch single where he dumps Leon on his head. He then does it a second time, but Leon this time was able to post to the ground. But at every moment, what we usually have seen with Belal is he is very happy to be static in those sort of takedown positions where he's riding the hips, and he makes it very, very difficult for his opponents to start to build. The thing that I was impressed with in this specific round is everything was just hunting the back. Everything. And I think partially that was because Leon has an actual quite a really good get-up game. We saw a couple of times that Leon would use butterfly hooks and overhooks to forward shift and get Belal off him and then build up that way. He used a really, really nice foot on hips transition. He used a really, really interesting reversal as he was getting to a 4-point in the third round to take Belal's back. Like, there is some really good jiu-jitsu in Leon Edwards, and I think Belal respects that and understands that that can be a problem for his sort of strategic battle. And so every time he would just take Leon down and either take him down in a fashion that exposed his back, or immediately put Leon into that sort of gladiator stance with one knee down, one knee up against the fence, where he's defending the back body lock, defending the grapevine hooks, defending these sorts of things. And I was just super impressed, one, with the fact that he was able to take Leon down full stop. We have seen how good Leon's takedown defense is against Colby Covington in the last one. And, you know, that's a volume wrestler, similar to how Belal is a volume wrestler. And then to keep him down. You know, something else with Kamaru Usman, we saw some reversals, we saw some get-ups, we saw some abilities to reverse clinch situations and get away. And that just did not exist outside of the last minute and 45 seconds of the fifth round, and then again in that third round. And so I think we have to give massive, massive credit to the game planning of Belal, to the focus of Belal, which obviously you've touched on already, but also the execution, right? To go into Manchester, to go in again with all the reverie that's surrounding it, with all the noise and everything else. And I wrote about that sort of in my spotlight, the noise, and to go out and execute in the way that he did. I think we have to tip our hats to him dramatically, as you have said. Do you have any final points for this one, or should we move on to the co-main?
One last thing. I thought his hands looked a lot better. He looked a lot quicker with his hands. He looked a lot more. He's usually very deliberate with his hands. They are 100% to set up opportunities to get inside. And there were moments in this fight, especially early in that first round, where he seemed pretty content to just, okay, we can throw hands for a bit. I'm good here. I can go with you. I know he's said the stuff about look like Canelo, best boxer in the UFC, all of that stuff that is Belal being Belal, but they looked better. And I think that first 90 seconds really took Leon by surprise a little bit. I think there was a little bit of, oh, he's getting me with this jab. His hands look a little bit quicker. Yes, the pressure's here, but he's not shooting. And then he shoots and he gets him down, and he gets him down easy. He makes the right, he picks the right shot, right? I think that's the thing. He picked the right shot all night and picked the right way to get, as you're saying, to Leon's back, or put him in positions where he had to give himself up. And you have to credit Mike Valley for that. You have to credit the work he's done with Lewis Taylor, the work he's done with Khabib at times. It's just a great performance. And now I can't wait to see what Belal Muhammad does going forward as the champion.
I agree. So from one great performance to another, we move to Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blaydes. I wrote about this in my spotlight. You can find that on SevereMMA.com. An interesting 60 seconds of fighting for me. I think we got to see Tom Aspinall finally in there with somebody who is not an inferior athlete to him. And I also think we got to see him use that elite level fight IQ. And what I mean by that is, in those 60 seconds, the read of the things that I saw were he tried to do the thing that he does really, really well, which is very light on his feet, bounces in and out, cuts his angles, and tries to draw shots from fighters because he's often the more athletic, the quicker on the feet with his hands. Curtis Blaydes was a little longer, I think, than maybe Tom Aspinall anticipated, but definitely much quicker, definitely much slicker off the mark. And he caught Tom Aspinall a couple of times with just a jab 1-2, right? Just a 1-2. And they didn't cause, massive fits and starts. Tom Aspinall never wobbled or anything like that. But it's just one of those where you bounce in, you get caught, you have to reset. Fine. Tom then, in those 60 seconds, there was only like 4 or 5 of these exchanges. But in those exchanges, Tom says, okay, what am I actually getting here? What reads am I making? What ability do I have to slip these shots? What ability do I have to make him miss? What ability do I have to get inside and land my own shots? In the second exchange, we see our first clinch exchange come from Tom Aspinall, switching stance as Curtis Blaydes fires his jab. He's able to slip that jab. He misses with his own jab counter, but he does land with an immediate left hand over the top. Now, Curtis Blaydes, because he's so overreaching, is a little off balance by that left hand. Tom Aspinall, because he stepped through a la Dustin Poirier with the switch hitting that I've loved for maybe forever, then is able to turn on the angle much, much, much quicker and just drives Curtis Blaydes to the fence, right? Drives him to the fence, gets to a clinch situation. Curtis Blaydes does fantastically well with his defensive handwork. And Tom Aspinall says, fucking all right, no problem. And then as he cuts off, bangs him with a left hand. Right? We reset. Third exchange. Curtis Blaydes lands a 1-2. Tom Aspinall's like, okay, cool. So I'm going to try something different. The thing he tries in that fourth time is an absolutely devastatingly crushing left hand, followed up by a screamer of a right hand. Curtis Blaydes sprawls out towards the mat. Tom Aspinall, this is where we get super technical, doesn't just bum rush, elbows, knees, the fucking whole lot, waste my entire gas tank. Grappling comes first. He squares himself to Curtis Blaydes, covers both hips, squeezes the knees nice and high on the balls of his feet, and then goes to town. Why? Because he knows Curtis Blaydes is a wrestler. He knows that if Curtis Blaydes is able to 4-point, there's a high possibility that Blaydes is going to be able to find his way to the fence, strip grips, turn inside, and survive. So he immediately covers both hips. Then he lands so many shots that Blaydes bellies himself out twice, manages to build himself back up, and is then thankfully saved by referee Mark Goddard. But I was impressed, to say the least. Thoughts?
I mean, for a 1-minute fight, it continued, and Tom Aspinall fights continued to be roughly a minute long, generally speaking. Every time I see him, I'm more and more impressed, and there's more and more that makes me go. I just like, it's interesting, right? Listening to Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell this morning on Morning Combat, they were talking about Aspinall and Jones, and Luke made the point of like, there's still so much that we don't know about Tom Aspinall's game because no one's been able to show us. And Tom and I have spoken about this in the past of all the different weapons, all the different elements of his game that are there, just sitting in the toolbox that he's happy to leave there until the time comes that he has to. And we've seen it doled out in fits and starts in different fights, right? The Volkov fight, he decides, I'm going to take you down and straight armbar you. Some other fights, we see a little bit more clinch. We see a little bit more grappling. We see a little bit more of the boxing. But he's somebody that uses exactly what he needs and nothing more because he wants to continue to have that surprise ability. He wants to continue to have that allure and mystique of, you don't know what else I have. The finishing sequence to me is the thing I sort of touched on when it comes to that urgency point I mentioned earlier, because you're right. Curtis Blaydes lands a couple good shots, and they're not shots that wobble Tom, that rattle Tom in any way, but they're shots you can follow up on. They're shots that you can then build into, especially as a wrestler, because he has to, because you are a big, strong human being, take that back step and reset. And so you can follow that right hand that lands clean and chase that through into a level change, into seeing if you can get on his hips. And there's points where Curtis Blaydes just doesn't have that. And I don't know if it's a IQ thing. I don't know if it's a reaction thing. I don't know if it's a processing thing. But you see in the finishing sequence, as you said, Tom Aspinall lands, recognizes this dude's hurt, and it's just instantly, how do I get him out of here? What are the steps I need to take to ensure that we're not getting up from this position? And so it's exactly what you said. Cover the hips, get him in a position where he's not going to be able to. He bellies himself out. He allows him to belly himself out and just goes to town, knowing belly down, and Curtis Blaydes can sit up and object all that you want. Wrote this in the piece. We'll say it anytime anybody asks me. Curtis Blaydes, that's on you. I know you weren't rocked. I know you were generally okay, but you can't be belly down with Tom Aspinall smashing home shots at the side of your head. It's just not going to happen. You need to be scrambling. You need to be like, as much as it sounds weird to some people, you need to roll onto your back and take some of those shots and try to work up. You need to be army crawling to the fence. You need to be doing something. And I know you have Tom Aspinall on you, and I know you're trying not to get clobbered in the head, but this is the game. And so Tom Aspinall continues to do Tom Aspinall things. To me, he is the best heavyweight on the planet, and it's not even a question. I mean, there's only one fight we should be making, and I just don't think it's coming, and that makes me sad.
Yeah, I mean, I want to spend more time on celebrating the performance than I am about talking about fights that almost certainly won't happen. I think my only thing that I will add to that is the rules say intelligent defense. Right, laying face down, looking at the canvas with your hands on your ears, like you're in the middle of a bad earthquake and you don't want to hear it, or a thunderstorm, or your parents are shouting, or whatever, is not intelligent defense, right? It's just not. What you're asking in that moment is Tom going to get tired of punching me in the head and stopping? It's not. It's just not intelligent defense in any way, shape, or form. And so I agree that from a sporting perspective, I understand how much that sucks for Curtis Blaydes. I understand how much losing in that way is so debilitating, personally, mentally, fiscally, career-wise. I get it. But the rules are the rules, right? And if you're not adhering to the rules, then the referee did exactly the right thing to step in. My 2 pence on the John Jones fight, like, sure, look, Jones is a smart man, and he knows how this business works. He knows that at 37, by the time he fights Tom, he's probably 38. He knows how this thing goes. John is an A-plus athlete, fantastic athlete. We know that he is an unbelievable level fighter in sort of every single facet, but time waits for no man, and neither does MMA. So I would not be shocked if Jones does fight Miocic. I wouldn't be shocked if Jones doesn't fight Miocic. And then they both walk off into the sunset. Curtis Blaydes. Tom Aspinall has made a unified heavyweight champion, and then fights like a Cyril Gagné, or some insert name in there, whatever. I think the only problem, not problem, but the only thing I don't like about this holdup with the unification or lack of unification is that if we look at the names that Tom Aspinall has beaten now, we have Andrei Arlovsky, obviously never fighting for a UFC title again, but that's a name that we know. Sergey Spivak, probably never fighting for a UFC title. Volkov, is right up there. Curtis Blaydes, obviously right up there. Marcin Tybura, you could picture a world that Marcin Tybura puts a couple of wins together and fights for a UFC title. Sergey Pavlovich, obviously right there or thereabouts. The only person that he hasn't fought really is either Jalton Almeida or Cyril Gagné. And so I think even if he does unify, we're going to be potentially doing some merry-go-round things, because Tom Aspinall is 31, which is still very young in the heavyweight division, and has shown us, as you said, absolutely fucking nothing in terms of percentage of his actual full arsenal. And so, yeah, we're going to have an interesting ride with Tom Aspinall, but I do think there's a weird limbo that sort of becomes of him now. Do you want to add anything to that, or do you want to move on to the Paddy fight?
I will just add a third name of Alex Poatan Pahea in there into the mix, because I think eventually he does try to go up and get a third belt. But yeah, this is the thing that happens when divisions go on hold. Your up and coming stars, and we've seen it a little bit with Jalton Almeida as well. Your up and coming stars go through everybody. The UFC puts them through the gauntlet. They beat everybody. Then they get to the top and it's, well, I've already beaten everybody, so we don't need to see it again. And then there's only a finite number of people you can fight. So it's going to be interesting to see what the next few years look like for Tom Aspinall.
Indeed. Paddy Pimblett, vintage walkout. I thought it was very, very cool that the UFC and Venom were willing to do the custom shorts. I think this is really cool that we're seeing this more and more and more. I really like that there's that level of, character that these fighters are allowed. Again, obviously, Paddy in Cage Warriors was very, very famous for wearing the Sakuraba shorts, and the Venom did their own sort of version of that, which I thought was just a beautiful little nod to his Cage Warriors days, to the UK market, and to Paddy the character himself. In terms of the fight, I thought it was a weird performance from King Green. He again didn't really look himself. He had elements of who I expected to see, right? The shit talking, the, oh, you missed a shot, or you took a shot, or you landed a shot, or I landed a shot, or whatever. But to your point, and I think this is a general, just a theme throughout the card, is there was no urgency in the same way that I've seen him in previous fights. The forward footwork was not as potent as it usually was. The head movement wasn't as potent as it was. He didn't seem to be wanting to sit down on his shots in the same way. And, we look at Paddy's footwork, his stance, his head movement. It's not that of a high level striker. His elbows are quite far away from his sides. His hands are quite far away from his face. Now, he certainly had a reach advantage on King Green. I completely understand that. And I do think that there were elements of Bobby's strategic planning in that fight, which was to not allow Paddy to snipe me. Paddy managed to snipe him, right? So I'll just very quickly talk about the finishing sequence, and I'll pass it over for your thoughts. So King Green grabs a single, basically catches a kick and runs the single. This is just Paddy 101, right? Like you and I said it in the preview, that something that Paddy does perfectly well, and maybe better than most in that division, is if he catches a hold of a position that he smells a submission in, he's going to snipe that submission. And if he gets anywhere close to that submission, it's finished. Like, it is finished. So he leans over the shot of the single leg, putting weight onto King Green's spine, and wraps up a front headlock. I don't think that the guillotine was ever there to be used as a guillotine, as a submission threat. Instead, I think Paddy was either going to use it to be able to scramble his hips away from King Green and then build back up to the top, and maybe turn it into a guillotine if we got to like a regular front headlock situation. But I don't think he was going to commit necessarily to the guillotine. However, what happens is King Green goes from having a regular gable gripped single leg to that, as he hits the mat, his left hand comes out to post. Paddy has already fallen to his left hip and has started to throw his left leg up and over the back of King Green, involving his right shoulder and right arm in what was going to be a triangle setup. Paddy notices the left-hand post, brings his leg out, wraps up a triangle. Now, to begin with, it's just a trap triangle, but King Green does not make the right decisions quick enough. Immediately, Paddy underhooks the arm and then switches to the leg, which is exactly what he should be doing. Postural control, King Green doesn't do a good enough job of stripping the grips that Paddy has. Paddy then switches off to a perpendicular triangle, which is far stronger than a straight-on triangle. And then, I actually think King Green goes to sleep a number of times, because Paddy adjusts a couple of times to be like, why is this cunt not tapping? What the fuck's going on? Eventually, King Green, I think, is almost completely out. His body starts to go limp. He was on his knees, but his body starts to go limp, and Paddy starts to apply an armbar. Thankfully, the referee notices King Green is out, shouts his name, doesn't get a response, stops the fight. We didn't have to see the just complete decimation of an arm unnecessarily. That is something that we have seen in regional MMA relatively recently, that's done the rounds on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I don't think we need to talk about that or mention that necessarily. But in terms of a performance, it went perfectly for Paddy Pimblett. In terms of a performance for King Green, I was shocked at some of the performances that I saw, some of the elements of the performance that I saw. What do you think?
I was surprised how poorly King Green fought, how poorly he looked. And Paddy just, like, you couldn't write a better result for him in this situation. And situations matter to me, right? He goes out and has this performance against any of the people that he's had coming up. So if he does this against Kazula Vargas in the second fight, Jordan Levitt, third fight, on and on and on. Fine. It's a great performance still, but we don't put as much stock into it because it's Kazula Vargas, Jordan Levitt, whatever the case may be. This was the one for every single one of us where we went, all right, now we're going to find out. They've been positioning him and saying he's a contender, and this is the guy to get on the bandwagon and follow this guy. And we don't believe it because we've seen Paddy for a decade now, and we know where we know where his limit is. And he delivered just the perfect performance. Just everything we talked about, you specifically talked about in the setup, executed perfectly. As soon as that shot happened and Paddy jumps on that guillotine, I started laughing of just like, this is exactly what we talked about. I was texting with a friend that, you know, had messaged beforehand and said, oh, I got Pimblett here. And I said, or he said, I got King Green here. And I said, in theory, in paper, and what we've seen from both of them of late, he should win. The elements are there for him to win. And as soon as that takedown happened, that's it. We're not getting up because Paddy is going to do what he's very, very good at. And that's wrap up your mistakes and then send you home. And as I talked about in the bigger picture on UFC.com today, we can't move the goalposts anymore. There's no more, nope, beat a top 15 guy. Beat a guy that has fought one of the toughest slates in UFC history in terms of that division, has had some very good results against very good fighters very recently. This isn't someone where it's, you know, you beat Tony Ferguson, who used to be Tony Ferguson. You beat a guy that's in the top 15. Welcome to the rankings. 7-0 in the UFC. Now let's see how far we can take this. Now let's see where that ceiling rests, because that's the interesting part now. Have we been screwing this up all along? Have we been underselling him all along? Is there a greater ceiling? Is it matchup based? Now I have new questions and I cannot wait for them to start being answered.
For sure. I mean, in terms of have we undersold him, the answer is no. But do I have more questions? Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is going to be the next fight is going to be super interesting. Like, do they do Renato Moicano? We discussed this. Like, I really like Joel Alvarez. I know he's on a fight card in a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is, but I really like that fight stylistically for both guys. I think it would be very interesting. That's me just wanting to see grappling effectively. We've discussed RDA offline. I like that too. Like, I think there's two ways the UFC are going to go about this, right? They would love to see Paddy Pimblett at 8-0, 9-0, and then somewhere in a massive fight somewhere in Vegas or whatever. And I think that's sort of been the routine up until now. There've been interesting, favorable matchups or elements where he can win, elements where, you know, the risk isn't too massive. But here, as you say, King Green comes in, big performance, top 15 guy that's looked decent for his age and for his fight age, has looked decent as of late, comes out. For whatever reason, King Green makes the mistake at the single leg and we are going home. We are where we are. But it's going to be very interesting for Paddy Pimblett in the next 9 to 15 months, I think. Very, very interesting. We will move on. Gregor Rodriguez, RoboCop fights Christian Leroy Duncan. I'm kicking myself, to be honest. I really am kicking myself. And I'm kicking myself because our very own Andy Stevenson collates the fighter picks graphic every month, for the UFC pay-per-views. And as always, on sort of Thursday evening or Friday morning or whatever it is, he messages everyone and says, has anyone got any final picks? Because he knows by now, right? Us lot change our minds all the time. And he said, has anyone got any final picks? And I put in the chat, I'm tempted to go Gregor Rodriguez. And I didn't do it. And really, in my mind, I knew that I was picking heart over brain, but I did it anyway. And then watching the fight, like I say, I'm kicking myself because thankfully Graham is top of the leaderboard of staff picks. I've broken the fourth wall, but I'm second and we are neck and neck, almost absolutely fucking neck and neck. And thankfully he picked Christian Leroy Duncan too. So I'm safe. Everything's fine. The world is still okay. It's still going to turn. We're all good. But I was super impressed with RoboCop here. You and I sort of spoke on the setup about how Gregor Rodriguez is somebody that will come in and say, all this technical stuff is cool, I'm just going to fight you. And I actually thought he showed the level with which he can do a bit of both, right? He showed that actually we can do the technical thing and I can do it just as well as you can. Oh, and when you're happy doing the technical thing, I'm going to take you down and hold you down and I'm going to beat you up a little bit here. I thought that Christian Leroy Duncan, regardless of the loss, gave a pretty good impression of himself. He showed elements that we haven't seen yet. He showed the grit, he showed the toughness, he showed the ability of that he can be the nail and then turn it around and still mark up Gregor Rodriguez. Now, you know, marking up Gregor Rodriguez is like, you know, the wind knocking over a door sort of thing. Like, you know, the scar tissue around that man's eyes and facial regions is insane. But what were your thoughts specifically on the fight itself, and what do you take from both fighters going out of this?
On the fight itself, it was a perfect representation to me of why you have guys like Gregory Rodriguez around and why they are needed in every division. We talk about tests all the time. This was a certain level of a test for Christian Leroy Duncan. He failed. He didn't fail horribly. One or two questions wrong, and it would have been change the answers on a couple of questions, and it's probably passing marks, and we're fine. But as you said, Gregory Rodriguez is somebody that generally says, yes, I'm a Brazilian wrestling champion. Yes, I'm a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt, but I really like punching people. And this time he said, let me just remind you about this here wrestling, because you want to be out there at range throwing side kicks, and I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. So let me just take you down, and then I'll get into the rough you up part. And there'll be some points where we get along the fence and I get into the rough you up part, and I enjoy it, and it's fine. It's just that it's a little bit of that understanding, I think. And to me, this is another one of those really good learning moments for Christian Leroy Duncan. It's going to show us, again, the next fight is going to be the one that is really important, because, okay, you just had this lesson. This man just taught you this lesson. How do you apply it? What does it translate into the next time out? It needs to be not a step back. Like, there shouldn't be, I honestly think there shouldn't be okay, let's reset a step or two. Let's just stay at this middle point. Let's find a Brad Tavares. Let's find somebody in that range that is going to be an equal test, a Bruno Silva. Go ahead.
Edmund Shabazian.
Sure. Perfect. Guy that has some holes, that has some flaws, but if you screw this up, he's going to beat you. Perfect idea. Because after the Armin Petrosian loss, they took him back a bunch of steps, and he looked really good against Dennis Tululin. But I think you and I could look pretty good against Dennis Tululin. Then it was Claudio Ribeiro. I think Claudio Ribeiro kicks my ass, but I think there's a lot of middleweights that do pretty well against Claudio Ribeiro. And so then it became Gregory Rodriguez, and it's just too big a step for a kid that still is figuring it out. I think he's had 11 fights in his career. Like, it's okay. I'm not ever going to overreact to losing to a Gregory Rodriguez, because I've seen enough fighters that lose earlier in their career and have to figure some stuff out and build and grow and develop. Our new welterweight champion was 1-2 in the UFC through 3 fights. It's okay. But he's got to improve off this one. And Gregory Rodriguez, God bless him, he deserves that opportunity to fight a ranked fighter that he's been asking for. That is not your lot in life, sir. You are destined to be in that second 15, fighting dudes on the come up, and maybe at some point, if there is someone in the top 15 that needs a little bit of image rehab, that needs a little step back in competition, then you get called upon. But I think he's going to be a guy that ends up fighting sort of the Christian Leroy Duncans of the world going forward. And it's good work if you can get it, because he's 7-2 in the UFC, could be 8-1, depending on how you score his fight with Armin Petrosian. It's not bad, man. It's pretty good. And we need, again, I don't think we give enough respect and credit and sort of a little bit of a salute to the guys like Gregory Rodriguez. So it was cool to see him get that on Saturday.
Indeed. I think the only thing I will add is I actually disagree on the Christian Leroy Duncan working it all out thing. He had 25 amateur fights. And so, like, I understand that amateur fights are completely different to pro fights. I understand there's different rule sets. The whole thing, I understand, is different. However, what it feels like to me is that Christian Leroy Duncan has gotten away with, up until now, a style like his. And we have seen with somebody like Michael Venom Page that style works until it doesn't, right? And when it doesn't work, what else have you got for me, right? Is there a B? Is there a C? Is there a D style? Is there a B, C, D look to style A? And what we saw, I think, less so in the Armin Petrosian fight, but more in this one, is the answer is no. And what do we do now when we go back to Mark Weir and when we go back to Team Renegade and the split that they have there? What do we do, right? Do we say, okay, well, we're going to try and build just something of a B and a C, where we're going to stand a little bit straighter, maybe a little bit narrower, and we're going to throw maybe a little bit more conventional? Or are we going to double down? And are we going to double down in a way that allows us to learn how to scramble a little bit better, learn our distance management a little bit better, learn how we can beat some of those clinch elements a little bit better? We're going to find out, as you said. We're going to find out. I'm going to hand this one over immediately. Oh, sorry, Arnold Allen first, and then we'll hand it over to you for Nathaniel Wood. Actually, fuck it. I'll hand it over immediately to you too. Arnold Allen, Giga Chikadze, thoughts?
Really impressed with Arnold's ability to just understand how the fight was going to go and stick to, this is how the fight is going to go. I'm going to have to deal with his speed and his kicks and the force of them early, but I'm a big, strong lad and I can take them. And I'll start getting the range and I'll start landing some shots. And as we get into 2, his speed will come down and I will land more. And as we get into 3, he will be tired and I will bust him up. There were still moments in that first round where Arnold went into what we talked about on the setup of, gets a little bit into that berserker mode, gets a little bit into that angry boy mode. And he landed his best shots of the first round in those moments when he just kind of pushed forward. I still would like to see him, and I understand why you don't necessarily against a guy like Giga Chikadze. Still would like to see him push forward a bit more. But this was a smart, effective, do the right things, understand the situation, not put yourself in any real bad spots. Went out and got the win that he needed to reset himself, to get himself sort of steadied in his standing in the division. And now he's still in that top 5-ish mix, should get a good name next. If we can get a win there, then we've more or less reset back to where we were prior to Max Holloway.
So watching it live, I was really frustrated by Arnold Allen. And I was really frustrated because it just feels like he is fighting within himself. And I know that he measured the left hand and then landed it about 15,000 times between minutes 5 and minutes 15. And I completely understand that approach. I completely understand when you have a mastermind like Firas Zahabi who has told him and will have drilled all camp, sure, look, this lad's got some kicks and then he's going to throw a lazy jab and then we're going to land a massive overhand left. And the scoring criteria says impactful damage first. And you're a big, strong fella and you're a bit of a fire hydrant and you got lunchbox hands and we're going to put ice cubes in them and a few nails. And then you're going to throw that loads and loads and loads of times. And then he's not going to like that. And then you're going to win. And then it's going to be fine. And I understand. I understand all of that. But it feels like that there is a man that is suppressing something in there that we are quite yet to see. And I am desperate to find out what it is. Now, after the fight, post-fight press conference, Giga Chikadze comes out and makes a statement saying, oh, I tore my right labrum and I need to have surgery and this, that, and the next thing. And Arnold came out and said, I don't know what fucking doctors he's been seeing, but I'm pretty sure I broke my right hand early in the first round. And I am still waiting on MRIs and scans and all this sort of stuff. So I don't know what fucking doctors he's seen, but I'd like to see them too. Now that's very Arnold Allen in terms of the humor and the things and the stuff. But I went back and I rewatched the fight and I noticed about 2.5 minutes into round 1, he just stops jabbing. And then in between 1 and 2, he's cradling his right hand, like he is hiding it away as he sits in the stool. And I don't notice whether he says to Firas, I think I've broken my hand. But in between 2 and 3, Firas says, I need you to jab more. And so he comes out in 3 and starts jabbing a little bit more, then lands a couple of left hands, busts up Giga again, and then just stops using his right hand completely. And so something has obviously happened in there. And so I then, as at my second viewing, retract my frustrations. But I still.
But the frustrations are still valid, because he does feel like somebody that is fighting in a straitjacket. Like, he feels like there's this next little piece and this more that is always there. And we've talked about it at great length, online, offline. Feels like there is a little bit more that we just never get with him, whether that's using that big strong boy clinch and using some wrestling and using some grappling, whether it's doing more than just working behind the jab and, as he did in this fight, the boom and left hand. It just always feels like there's a little bit more that either we're not being allowed to see or he is choosing not to show. And I fully respect the relationship. I respect game planning and approach and all of those things. They got a victory, so it's very hard to sit here and be like, well, you should have done this instead. But it does feel like he is constantly a little bit bottled up.
I agree. Somebody that wasn't bottled up was Nathaniel Wood. You spoke to Mr. Wood and put out a lovely article prior to his performance against Daniel Pineda. I'm just going to hand it straight over. You said to me offline that you expected a big performance from Nathaniel Wood on Saturday night, and I think it's fair to say that we got one. What did you think of the performance? What do you think of Nathaniel Wood at 145 now? Tell us.
I think the same thing I've thought basically the whole way through, and that he is absolutely someone that is perfectly suited for the second 15 and may be able to creep into sort of the bottom third of the top 15. I think there are some guys further up the ladder that are going to always be problematic for him, that are always going to represent challenges because they are bigger, stronger, better grapplers, things of that nature. I thought he looked really terrific in spots. I think much like the commentary team and much like probably a lot of people watching, I was a little bit mystified with, okay, you've heard him. What are you doing getting into his guard? Like, what? This is where Daniel Pineda has made his career, is getting hurt, recovering, getting you in his guard, finding something, coming back a little bit, letting the pain in his belly go away so that he comes up and then can swing more big hammer and hooks at you. I mean, we saw in the third round, he landed one shot, and there's a point after he lands that backwards elbow that you can see Nath sort of leaning off to the side and doing one of these where he's like shaking out his eyes, basically, of just like, Jesus, I didn't think that was coming. And it basically won Daniel Pineda the round. Like, as good as Nate did in the rest of that fight, it's sort of, you have a few moments where you're like, just bring him back to his feet and whack that body one more time, 2 more times, smash that leg one more time, 2 more times, and we're getting out of here. The part of it that I don't think, and he talked about it at his post-fight availability, and there's no way for me or anyone else to really truly quantify this and express what it was like for Nathaniel Wood in that moment. In talking to him, I can tell you how much his daughter has impacted his life in 10 weeks, 10 very short weeks. I can tell you how difficult it was that soon after she was born, she was rushed away for surgery. She was born with CDH, was taken away for surgery right away. And the nurse, as Nate said to me, so I'm not telling tales out of school, said to him, we'll say your goodbyes. And he was like, well, that's not something you fucking say. Like, what are we doing here? And, of course, with his anxiety and things that he deals with that he's been open about, kind of sends him for a loop. Then they get her home and everything's okay. And then they find out she has a hole in her heart and isn't putting on enough weight to be able to. They generally like to do the surgery at 3 years old, let the child grow a little bit, become strong enough. She's not putting on enough weight. There's no way to quantify what this is like sitting on your shoulders when you're also then coming in off a loss, where you're coming off a loss in a fight where, walking into the octagon, as he told me, I just don't give a shit. I don't want to be here. I've been in my head all week. I'm in a terrible place, anxiety, depression wise. I just don't want to be here. And then you're dealing with, and I think Arla's situation certainly motivates him, certainly sent him in there ready to go, dialed in, because all he cares about now is my daughter. The only thing, and he said it a couple of times and we had a few laughs about it, of like, you see her and right away she's fighting more than most people have ever had to fight. She's already lined up for a second surgery. She's been around for 10 weeks. And so his words were, it makes me realize and recognize how whiny we can be. And so I don't think there's going to be any more whining and grousing from Nathaniel Wood, but it's certainly got to be tough. And so to go out and have a performance like that, that is largely very good, with all of that on your shoulders, props to you, Nath.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Bruno Brazil looked pretty good against Molly McCann, hurt Molly McCann a number of times to the body. Molly McCann, as always, gritty, tough, durable, never, ever, ever out of the fight, always pushing until the very, 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 very final seconds of every single round of every single fight. I think the difficulty here was that we've got somebody in Bruno Brazil who was just more skilled than Molly McCann on the night, was too able to dissuade some of that sort of swathing, erosive pressure of Molly McCann, and was able to put her on her back. I thought Molly has looked more well-rounded every single fight that she gets into. It just, I fear that it's happened a little bit too late in her career. I think the move to 115 is good for her. Clearly, she has a strength advantage there in terms of what she had at 125. But Bruna Brazil has impressed me over her last three performances, sorry. This was pretty cut and dry for me. Do you have anything specific you want to add?
Not really. People are going to think I'm an asshole for saying this, but there's just always been a limit to Molly McCann. There's just always been a ceiling. And so I think we overreacted to the wonderful moments of those two fights in London, knocking out Luana Carolina and knocking out Hannah Goldie. They're great moments, but we stopped taking them as what they were and wanted them to be bigger. I think we did that a little bit with Diana Belbitsa when she submits her. I think you and I talked about it afterwards of like, okay, but it's Diana Belbitsa. There's just limits. And as much as I want to see good people who are genuine good people, and Molly McCann is genuine good people, sometimes that isn't a thing that helps you win fights, unfortunately. And as you said, she was in with a more skilled, more successful fighter on Saturday night. And so she's saddled with another loss.
Indeed. Jake Hadley steps up, short notice, upper weight class, Kaelin Loughran. Massive balls on Jake Hadley, frankly. Massive, massive balls. Desperate need of a win. Goes out, upper weight class against a solid fighter in Kaelin Loughran. And just looks pretty good, to be honest. Just looks pretty good. Shows us another element to his game. Shows us that he can fight off the back foot, that he can have better footwork, that he can dissuade the pressure of somebody like Kaelin Loughran. Like, we know the size of Kaelin Loughran at 135. He is a big fella for that division. He is very thick. He is, Spencer is, for the audio listeners,
gigantic head.
Talking about the size of Kaelin Loughran's cranium and skull, and he hits hard. Like, he hits hard for 135, right? There's meanness and viciousness in those shots, and I was just very, very impressed with Jake's ability to counter, Jake's ability to pull shots from Kaelin Loughran, Jake's ability to make Kaelin Loughran miss. The fact that he was landing the more impactful strikes on Kaelin Loughran, I thought was very, very impressive. His takedown defense was great. Some of the short scrambles we had were pretty good. His ability to drag Kaelin Loughran into a half guard and then use that half guard to build himself back up was very, very impressive. This was a much needed win for Jake Hadley, and I think some much needed lessons for Kaelin Loughran were taken from this fight also. What would you like to add?
I think this is going to end up being Jake Hadley's moment, similar to what Nathaniel Wood had against Charles Rosa. where he was coming back and he needed to win and he went up a division and then was like, I think I'm going to stick around here. I think I'm not going to bother with that weight cut anymore. Because I think there's a little bit of bravado. There's certainly some bravado to Jake Hadley. There's a little bit of machismo to him. He carries himself strutting around White Kong, and he wants to be a bully at 25, but he's finding out that he can't necessarily be the bully that he was in different promotions and in different spots at 25 at this level. It hasn't worked that well for him. But at 35, he can't be that bully, but he can be something else, and he can use these other weapons and he can use these other tools, and he used them really well on Saturday. The boxing looked really good. The grappling in a defensive scramble mentality was really good. And this was a terrific performance. I have never been super high on Kalen Loughran, but I understand that he is a good fighter. I think he is somebody that you need to get in his ear and say, listen, man, we need to just go more. We've talked about this. You and I have talked about this all the time. You got to just throw. Like, you can't have 15, 20, 30 seconds where you're not throwing anything. I don't care how hard you throw, what kind of impact it's having. If you're not landing shots, the other guy can just jab your face off. And I think there's a little bit of that Kalen Loughran needs to learn and understand, and just get a little more fluid and get a little more bouncy and get a little more loose with things and just go, which I think he showed in Cage Warriors far more so than we're seeing at this level. So let's have the conversation about, okay, let's get back to who we were, because we're not that dude. I know it's a different level, but let's go. But I mean, Jake Hadley coming in on 2 losses, short notice, against the guy that, you know, he's crossed paths with, he's a little familiar with, he understands what Kalen Loughran brings to the cage. It's a great win. Much needed, great win.
Completely agree. We're going to spend a little bit of time, as we just tick over the hour mark. We're going to spend a little bit of time on Muhammad Mokaev versus Manel Kape. And then we're going to breeze through what was a fantastic performance by Oban Elliott, a good win by Modestas Bukauskas and Sam Patterson, Mick Parkin picking up a performance of the night bonus. And then we'll round ourselves off with Sean O'Bannon winning over Alice Ardalian. So the elephant in the room is Muhammad Mokaev goes out, wins a... People made out that it was way worse of a fight than it actually was because of the surrounding antics. But performance-wise, Muhammad Mokaev went out and put on a measured, smart, defensively sound performance against Manel Kape, took him down in the spots where he could take him down, wasn't able to keep him down for significant portions of the fight, fine, but was able to put him on his back, was able to land some shots, and looked just fine in doing it. I thought Kape also represented himself pretty well, looked quick, looked strong in spots, but we saw an element of Manel Kape, which was in the setup. We said, if the dialed in 100% super ready, super on Manel Kape turns up, this is a super stern test for Muhammad Mokaev. I would say maybe 65% of Manel Kape turned up, maybe 60% of Manel Kape turned up, and offered Mokaev some problems, right? And we saw that. We definitely saw that. And I thought Mokaev passed them relatively well. Now, the elephant in the room is that these guys had traded some barbs. It had turned physical at least once in the fighter hotels. And there was some conversations about Mokaev having sucker punched Manel Kape needing stitches, Muhammad Mokaev having a little cut underneath the eye because the teams had gotten into it and all this sort of stuff. After the fight, it is announced by Dana White in the post-fight press conference that Muhammad Mokaev fought out his contract and will not be re-signed. He did not say it in those words, but that was the intention of his points. And so we're left now in this very, very strange limbo, which is Muhammad Mokaev, 22 years of age, 23 years of age, whatever he is, 23 years of age, 7-0 in the UFC, just beaten 2 very well-ranked 125-pound fighters, and potentially is without an organization. If I could first get your thoughts on the performance and how you thought Mokaev approached the fight and what you liked about it, and then we can dive into sort of the auxiliary points.
The performance is fine, exactly as you said. It's a defensively responsible, smart manner of fighting a guy as dangerous as Manel Kape. The laughability of it and the downgrading of it 100% is corollary to they are jumping through security at each other at the ceremonial weigh-ins. There is a truckload of extra security in there when they get in the cage. Muhammad Mokaev is running around to the other side and jumping up on the fence trying to get at him, and it's this big posturing. They got into it in the Fighter Hotel. They got into it at the PI earlier this year. They have been after each other and talking all the shit. And it really was the meme of the two dogs literally gnashing at each other behind the gate. And then the gate slides out of the way and they just stop and look at each other. And then the gate slides back and they're gnashing at each other. And that's what it felt like, right? I knew we weren't going to get two guys being crazy and ridiculous and just showing careless disregard for skills and talents, but I thought we would get a little more than we got. Some of that to me is, or at least probably more than 50% of it falls on Manel Cape. Like, dude, you just, for as good as you are, you just got to go, right? This is the same as Keelan Loughran, but on a like elite level. We've seen you do amazing things. Go, throw shots, do something. And you could hear Eric Nixick at times, and I know you don't listen to commentary and have sound on, but you could hear Eric Nixick at times being like, we got to go, bud. Like, you got to do something. You're standing there in front of this guy and a little feint here and a little feint there and a crossover between your legs here. Just got to go. As for the rest, I'll start by saying, I personally, if I am sitting behind the big desk with the UFC letters behind my desk and I am the final decision maker, I am not parting ways with a undefeated 23-year-old that I think has championship talent. Now, I'm not privy to negotiations, to behind the scenes information of challenges, difficulties, frustrations, whatever they may be. But just from what I know and who I am not letting a 23-year-old unbeaten fighter that has just beaten the 7th ranked guy in the world, that earlier in the year beat the guy that is now currently ranked, I believe, 5th or 4th. We're finding a way to figure this out. We've worked with annoying people many times over. We've worked with folks that we think aren't necessarily entertaining many times over because the talent level is so great. Now, the interesting wrinkle here is that PFL and Bellator do not have robust flyweight divisions. And so you're sort of setting him free into a very unknown world. And it's good luck. Go see what you can figure out. I'll be interested to see what happens. I'll be interested to see how this plays out over the next whatever amount of time it is before Muhammad Mokaev signs somewhere. I think there's a possibility that it ends up still being the UFC, that everybody cooler heads prevail. We figure all of this out and we get this guy back in the UFC, which from a talent level and standing of what the UFC is in this space is where he belongs. But I also fully always understand flat out his contract and we're not bringing him back. It's the decision they're allowed to make. I personally disagree with it. But if I'm going to sit here and let that ruin enjoyment, thoughts, appreciation of everything else based on 1-2 athletes, then I'm always going to be angry because they make a lot of decisions that I disagree with, but they're theirs to make.
Yeah, I think what it signals to me is that if we were privy to all of this supposed backstage rumor, difficult to work with, matchmakers don't like rumor, all this stuff that keeps circulating online, that, by the way, has literally zero evidence attached. It is just words that fucking nobody is able to put any material to. Then we could have a more informed decision as to what the trade-off is, right? We know, because Muhammad Mokaev has said so, that prior to this performance, the UFC had told him, very similar to Colby Covington's position, was that should he continue to fight in this way, that he would not be re-signed, or at least the UFC would not look at him in a favorable way. Nate Maness has recently come out on Twitter X and said very similarly that the UFC chose not to re-sign him with the reasoning that the matchmaker did not think that his fights were exciting. To me, what it signals is, again, an element of the UFC, one, exercising their absolute bona fide right as the promotion, right? You don't have to re-sign anyone, right? Other than champions that got clauses and these things and whatever. But outside of that, you do not have to re-sign anyone ever. What it also signifies to me, however, is that the product of the UFC, the leverage of the UFC has never been stronger. And never have we been in a time where we see the Francis Ngannou debacle. And I think there are mistakes on both sides, right? But the UFC are willing to just tear up a contract and say, fuck you then. Go do something else. Come on. Go and find another parent. Go and find another employer that will do the things that we do and that's the outfit that we are, and fighters struggle, right? Francis Ngannou, thankfully, landed very much on his 2 feet for a period of time. And he fights Tyson Fury, and, he goes and he fights Anthony Joshua, and he makes insane, life-changing money. Amazing. Muhammad Mokaev is not Francis Ngannou, right? And so Muhammad Mokaev finds himself in this very, 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 very precarious position where Bellator does not have a 125-pound division. PFL does not have a 125-pound division. The only major promotion is one that has a 125-pound division. And then what are you going to do? Put him against Mighty Mouse, and if he wins, what then? Like, what then, right? Like, the depth to that division is not the same. The awareness of that decision, the market for that division is far less than it is in the UFC. And so the leverage, as always, right? The house always wins, always. The only time the house doesn't win is when you're Conor McGregor at the height of his powers, right? Literally. That's when the house doesn't win. And maybe when you move an event for John Jones. But these things are allegedly happening. We are staring down the barrel, I think, of a decoupling in terms of the UFC have asked fighters to go and build their own brands, and Muhammad Mokaev, in whatever way he has done that. He has a vast following of fans, but still the strings are very easily cut. Nobody's bigger than the brand. Nobody's bigger than those 3 letters. Nobody. And unfortunately, Muhammad Mokaev might be used as a scapegoat to once again remind people, you could be 23, 7-0 with 2 massive wins under your belt in your last 2. And we don't give a shit. If you do something we don't like, go and find somewhere else then.
And I think there's also the need to address the thing he talked about at his media of, if you're not more exciting. We've talked about this now for years on end, coming off of Contender Series, right? First 2 seasons of the Contender Series, they brought a combined 34 fighters, I believe, or 36 fighters in out of, there were eight shows for each of the first 2 seasons. So you had 16 weeks of 5 fighters a pop. So 80 fights, 160 fighters to choose from. They chose less than half because they were very discerning about who we're going to bring. And in the last bunch of years, and particularly the last 2, it's you get a win, you're coming in. And we want everybody to go out there and be as, like, how long has Dana White been hammering the message of entertaining, fight to finish. This is part of that, right? Doesn't matter that you're 23, doesn't matter that you're 7-0 and ranked number 3 in the division and rightfully should be probably next in line for a championship opportunity. We don't think you're entertaining enough. Our fans aren't as jazzed about you as they are about the guy that goes out there and is just a berserker looking to get finishes. Take your tactical approach, take your smart, very good wrestling, and go find somewhere else. It sucks. I don't like it, but it's their purview. And I refuse to let myself constantly sit here mired in misery and frustration for what a promotion that I have no control over, that I enjoy watching still, whose athletes I enjoy conversing with, covering, representing, holding up when they do great things, letting that bring me down. It sucks. I'm going to miss Muhammad Mokaev. I hope this gets worked out and he comes back, because he should be in there amongst the best flyweights, in the world. But this is where we've been heading for a while. And so this is just reminder of where we've been heading.
MMA is not a sport, full stop. We will move on to the Fight Pass prelims and the final prelim portions. We had 3 finishes in this 5-fight stint. 2 arm triangle chokes, which is interesting to get back to back. I'm going to run through them very, very quickly, and then I will pass them over to you for your deeper thoughts on whatever you fancy. So Oban Elliott looked absolutely fantastic against Preston Parsons in the severe setup. I mentioned that I felt like this is a potential banana skin. Preston Parsons, big fella, looked really good against Matt Samuelsberger, and I was just super, super, super impressed with Oban Elliott here. Did exactly what he needed to do, put Preston Parsons against the cage, wore him out for that first round, filled his arms with lactic acid, landed the shots he needed to land in the second, then gets the fight down, looks great, gets the fight down in the third, looks great, scrambles well, defensively responsible, just, gets caught a couple of times, fine, these things happen in MMA, you're going to get clipped, it's a fight, but I was just very, 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 very impressed. Happy to see Modestas Bukauskas get a finish against Marcin Pratnio, who is absolutely so far away from being UFC level. I have no idea why he's in a contract whatsoever. Sam Patterson just exploits the lack of ground game of Kiefer Crosby. I thought Sam grew into the fight in that sort of first 60, 65 seconds where they were on the feet. Kiefer, always dangerous from a kickboxing range, but I thought Sam dealt with it very well, used his range very well. And I mean, the takedown to arm triangle finish, Lee Hammond in the corner would have been absolutely furious, I am sure. I have no doubt in my mind that Kiefer Crosby knows how to defend himself better than that on the ground. I have no doubt in my mind that people at SBG, the Lee Hammonds, the coach Kavanaghs, these sorts of people, Richie Smollins, Gary Rooney, would have shown Kiefer to a greater degree than he was able to show on the night. It's unfortunate, but these things happen in MMA. Mick Parkin looked fantastic against Lucas Brzeski. You can really, really feel that team BFG rubbing off on him. Every time he comes out, he looks a little bit more vicious, a little bit more confident, sticks behind that jab really well when he needs to, builds himself into the fight, absolutely decimates Brzeski, fair play. Shauna Bannon, again, tough fight against Elise Ardelin. I thought rounds 1 and 2 were close. Round 3 was by far her best round. She wins a split decision there. Thoughts, specific fights you'd like to cover? Feel free.
So I will go back to what I said on the setup of, I still don't quite get the Oban Elliott thing, but I'm happy to continue watching because he continues to win fights, and I can certainly appreciate that he navigates that well. Marty B getting a win, happy to see it. He seems like a genuine good dude. Getting the finish, getting a submission, which he's never done in the UFC, is always cool to see. I think he absolutely dominated that fight. Sam Patterson is becoming increasingly interesting to me. Certainly you can point to both of the gentlemen that he's now beaten as having holes in their game that he exploited. Fine. That's MMA. Hey, you've got a weakness. I'm going to take that weakness and rip it apart and make you pay for having that weakness. He's a big, long, lanky, very good grappler from what it looks like. He landed that takedown right into mount and just went, I'm not pissing about here. We're just getting out of here. Not wasting any time. We're getting gone. And he's done it two fights in a row. Fine. Lower tier competition. Great. Beating the guys that are put in front of him. Let me see more Sam Patterson. Mick Parkin is somebody I have been in on from the get-go, partially because I got to talk to him before his debut. He is a lovely lad. I think he is somebody that let's just continue to take our time. He is 28 years old. There is no need to rush him into anything. I think I said in my post-fight prognosticator matchmaking column on Sportsnet, all right, it's time to fight Martin Budai. This is the next guy you go in against. You go in against another big fella from the Contender Series, and we keep moving up just a step. And it's really only a half step. We go in there against a big fella that's going to want to lean on you, so you're going to have to deal with that. But your hands are better. Your athleticism is better. Your gas is better. Let's just use that because, as you said, and I hope BFG stands for big fucking guys. Like, I hope that's what the team name actually stands for. You go in there with two of the best BFGs in the world right now, Tom Aspinall, and every single day with Big Phil DeFries, who I'm sure is just tossing you around and big brothering you on the mat and all of these things. And you're slowly putting it together. And you could see him in that fight making those reads and making that assessment of timing and range and speed and all the things coming back to him, where he just went, okay, this right hand's going to be here. Here it is. Oh, he really didn't like that, and just got him out of there as perfectly and as quickly and precisely as you can. Great win for him. Sean O'Bannon, look, you got a victory, so it's hard to turn around and be super critical. It's not great. It's okay. She got a win. Grand. Third round again was her best. We need to figure that out, because you've been in 2 fights, and in each of them you came out not looking good. So we need to wake up and start, as we've talked about, as has been the theme. We need to be dialed in and ready to go. Round 3 needs to be round 1. So whatever we got to do to get us there, that's what you need to do, because the competition only gets better from here. It's not Alice Ardelean next time out. It's somebody that's been in the UFC a little bit longer. It was Bruna Brazil the time before this. It won't be Molly McCann because you're friendly and you'll avoid that fight, but it'll be somebody in that range. And they're going to be ready. They're going to be dialed in, and they're not going to have taken the fight on short notice. So you got to be ready. Congrats on the first victory. I understand that, it's been a rough year outside of the octagon. Fair play. Sort it all. Got to be ready to go on fight night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that will wrap us up. Overall, I think the night was underwhelming. Underwhelming in terms of it didn't come across as an arena that was jam-packed, full of fucking noise, full of hype, full of attention. Maybe that's the time difference. Who knows? That's yet to be seen. But overall, I think everyone fought to their best of abilities based on the variables. And I think we can all be pretty impressed with the storylines that have come out of it. That was the balance breakdown. Spencer and I will be back later on in the week for the setup for the Corey Sandhagen versus Cousin Umar card over in the East. We will talk to you later on in the week. If you want to follow and find Mr. Spencer Kite's work, you can find him at @SpencerKite, at Spencer Kite, right? At Spencer Kite on all of the socials. You can find him on Fighters Only. You can find him on Sportsnet. You can find him on UFC.com. You can find me here, frankly. Fair play to you. Take care of yourselves. See you next time. Bye-bye now.